Hello everyone, my name is Angelina Visara. I am a graphic information technology major here at Arizona State University, focusing on animation. My portfolio is for the 2019 Spring Term B session for the Principles of Visual Communications under the instruction of Dr. Laverne Abe Harris. I came into this class with beginner skill level with Adobe Illustrator, and I was introduced to the world of InDesign. Therefore, the bar was set pretty high for myself, but I still managed to learn a lot through my professor and my classmates. I am using Adobe Premiere to present my online portfolio. Design theory is the extensive gathering of comprehension of the phases essential in the development of design, combining principles of design such as balance, proportion, rhythm, emphasis, and unity coexist to create visually attractive designs. In reference to those principles, when we acknowledge the elements of design such as line, shape, color, value, texture, size, and space, we can create optimal pieces of art that speak to audiences universally. The goal of any design is to establish harmony, and when we use these theories to help develop a successful design, we as artists know we've communicated our underlying messages clearly. Gestalt's Principles on Visual Perception discusses the importance of deconstructing a whole piece and determining meaning through the sum of the parts. Defining a firm comprehension on the fundamentals of visual communication is crucial during the design process when you want to achieve a successful message to your viewers. I'm still a novice in this particular concept, therefore I use this fundamental theory in my design projects by paying closer attention to details such as color and composition to ensure that my designs were aesthetically pleasing and collectively recognizable. The first project we were introduced was our personal identity logo. We were required to create 9 rough drafts of potential designs that resonate within ourselves. I focused on channeling creativity in my design since I consider myself an artist. I played around with different fonts and attempted to add my own unique stamp on my initials. I enjoy using serif font, so I decided to make my logo reflect that part of my taste. In my top 3 choices, I chose the designs that had the most visual flow. I liked these selections since they were the easiest to identify. I decided to stick with design 5 as my classmates agreed that this one is the cleanest and most visually interesting out of my selections since it has great depth and weight rather than a flat-duty graphic quality. My peers mentioned that the logo looked more like an N rather than an A and a V at first glance, but for me that will work since I'll be getting married soon and my new last initial will be N. In my final black and white piece, I pondered how I would reflect color appropriately without going overboard with vibrant colors. I really wanted to tie in the 2 letters A and V. I felt that adding too much color to a design that is already pretty busy would have made the weight of the piece too heavy and difficult to establish readability. I played around with ellipses in Illustrator to make the initials eclipse against a rich shade of red in the background. I chose this red to reflect on my Japanese heritage. In my heritage, black alone is traditionally an ominous color representing death, destruction, fear, and sorrow, while also it represents elegance and sophistication. Red represents emotional energy, vitality, love, and the sun, such as represented in the Japanese flag. Combining the 2 colors together made the piece reflect sophistication and powerful emotion, while also giving just enough contrast to make the design successful had it just been black. I added the stroke to contrast the letters from the piece, so the piece felt as though it were 3-dimensional without adding too many more details, and to separate the 2 rich colors from bleeding in together too much to see the letters. Using that crisp contrast with the stroke within the red circle of the curl in the A, it brings more attention to the outline of the A so it doesn't look immediately like an N. I plan on using this logo for my future projects and designs as my own personal stamp. Our next project was to create a newsletter about ourselves, while also incorporating our personal identity logos to make the piece individual. Our goal is to use our knowledge on composition and typography to make a dynamic design that was visually pleasing to a viewer. Using traditional top-down processing, I decided to make my designs reflect traditional newsletters. In my rough drafts, I was determined to make the piece more interesting, but struggled with finding original ideas to make the content pop. In my first attempt at my black and white composition, I gravitated to a flat and uninspired layout that ultimately I was unhappy with. Being newer to the world of InDesign and Illustrator, I was hesitant to use those programs for my layouts, but discovered that upon using InDesign for my later revisions, it was a lot easier to put what I was imagining in my head onto the page, rather than when I was using Microsoft Word. In my later rough drafts to further develop the newsletter, with help from my classmates and professor, I made sure to design the nameplate to be more appealing, and attempted to make the white space across the design more useful to separate topics throughout my newsletter. While my peers said that they liked my initial clean layout, I later felt that it was too busy in areas around my topics, and the format was lazy and plain. In my final revised newsletter, I was able to combine multiple elements from each rough I created to make a layout with color that I was proud of in the end. Both the professor and my classmates had mentioned that the nameplate was bland and needed to reflect the artistry from my personal identity logo, so I decided to add some decorative elements behind the new and improved title to my newsletter. I ended up using Microsoft Himalaya font for the title and Adobe Gramon Pro font for my content pieces to try and match in with my logo, and I used serif fonts to make the newsletter feel more cohesive. To balance out my content, I started by removing the boxes I initially used for my first design, and allowed the text to float while using white space to separate my topics for me. When it came to allowing color to the piece, I struggled trying to incorporate the appropriate shades, so I wanted to make the piece more than just red and black from my logo. The gold I selected for the newsletter nameplate was selected to represent life and sunshine, and it paired well with the warm tones I was also using throughout the piece to reflect my logo. Using standard hierarchy, I designed my lead story, my aspirations, with intent to catch the eye, so the readers would know that this was the highlight of the newsletter, where I also added a drop shadow effect to make this headline stand out. To emphasize the beginnings of the paragraphs, I made the typography in the first two words of the paragraphs larger in font size, and added a semi-bold italic adjustment. To follow the rules of thirds from the golden ratio, I wanted to make sure that the visual flow of the newsletter was achieved successfully by introducing those grid lines to help me design the layout. In the end, I ended up allowing my newsletter headline to remain centered and the focal point, and allowing for a full feature-length section at the bottom for the secondary story to remain relevant without being interrupted by extra details like my content section. Learning the aspects of balance throughout a composition such as a newsletter helped me determine what the most important details are, which are extraneous, and which ones should be emphasized further, but not too alienated from the unity of the piece. For our final project, we had to find a poorly done website and redesign it with our knowledge on design principles, wrapping everything we learned throughout the term. Without altering the branding of the website too much, we were tasked with finding creative and visually attractive composition to highlight the purpose of the website and intrigue the first-time users to continue browsing the content. I decided to use the website for a local tattoo shop in my town, and while the original website is clean and crisp, I felt as though the layout was poor and did not properly highlight the purpose of the content within the web page. In the rough drafts I created, I wanted to develop a piece that reflected the mood and intended audience for the viewer. Typically, those looking for a tattoo shop want to know the shop's address for directions and want an immediate phone number they can contact with questions. I also wanted to make sure that the viewers had the option to follow the shop outside of the website and onto popular social media accounts to spread awareness of the small shop through Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter. In my first attempt at redesigning the homepage, I tried a simple and flat layout contrasted with the grunge background, but found that I used too much white space up top and threw off the entire theme of the piece. In my second revision, I used an ellipse to showcase the company's name in a unique way that drew interest from the first glance. My classmates agreed that this is the layout I should stick with, since it held the tattoo shop vibe that focuses on artistry and is not too overwhelming with content. In my third mock-up, I decided to try a different theme, using a galaxy background, and I put the company's name in a moon to mimic the ellipse I used in the previous mock-up. I also used this galaxy background to create a dynamic flow to make the homepage more interesting, rather than just having floating text. Having the menu options float on the side rather than having a sectioned off menu made the design appear more imaginative and out of this world. In my revisions, I tried to highlight the company logo rather than just using their name to make a statement about the business. In this first revised attempt, I made sure the company's logo was the stem of inspiration for the rest of the revisions and ensured that red, black, and white were reflected appropriately. In this revision, I expanded the grunge background to create more of a focal point with the skull, and made sure the menu options were reduced so it didn't overshadow the logo of the homepage. My professor mentioned that I should use a sans serif font to reverse out for body copy and even the menu links, so I changed my original serif font to Acumen Pro. In the revision I did for the third design, I made the menu link smaller and used Impact and Roboto fonts to make a statement and cancel out from the serif font used for the company's logo. In my final revision from Mockup 2, I changed the font style to Sans Serif Roboto to contrast and balance out from the company logo, which is the focal point. I also switched the position of the man in the photo. Instead of just mirroring the image, I wanted to rearrange my composition to be more visually interesting, so the man wasn't facing away from the text and content. I also added a Facebook thumbs up to make sure that the dead space was used. Overall, this project helped me determine the importance of composition and balance while maintaining a common message with viewers. I also discovered the importance of highlighting the colors you choose in a theme and make sure they're not overwhelming, irrelevant, unnecessary, or contrasting with the design. Using appropriate lines, shades, textures, typography, size, and shapes helped me determine the overall themes of these homepage designs. Using Gestalt's theory of visual perception, I tried to give meaning to each element of design I added to my pieces. I asked myself, what does this mean? How will this message translate? Are the colors too overwhelming or distracting? Does the typography make sense? Every design I made in this class, I kept that in mind and made sure to use the critiques from my professor and my classmates to ensure that I am improving those principles and elements with each revision. I will carry these critiques into my future design classes and always question whether my visual communication is successful by asking for constructive feedback and collaborating with my peers for further insight.